beautiful to be able to serve, right? And I think that a lot of people feel that way, especially teachers, like this is a calling, I am serving, and that's honorable. But at the same time, you know, it is not sustainable to constantly be serving and to erase your personhood, or to be in a culture that erases, you know, your needs as an individual person and then expects that to continue on. I mean, it creates a culture of burnout, which is what we see largely among teachers right now. And I would say, you know, since obviously that has been going on and being cultivated since before COVID, but especially during 2020 and then until this point too, like in the past 5 years, have just seen this growing culture of burnout, really, where people are recognizing like this is not sustainable.
So feel me when I bring it, sing it loud. I'm from the loop and I'm proud, run a mile for the cause. I'm right.
Hi guys, it's your girl Nechama, your favorite Jew from the Lou. Welcome back to my podcast. And today I am so excited to have Sarah Bland with me. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, it feels like such an honor.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes.
I'm always so honored when people agree to come on my podcast.
Oh my gosh, I love your podcast. I've been listening to all the episodes and I'm just hooked. So yeah, it's great. And I really am just thrilled to be here. So thanks for having me.
That means so much. I'm like, it's so wild to me because I guess from other people's perspectives, they look at a podcast and they're like, oh, wow, that's so cool. How do you go about it? Because there's a lot of details that go into making a podcast.
Right.
It's not impossible.
Yeah.
But in my head, I'm still that corporate girl who got a $200 budget for a hobby, bought some mics.
Yeah.
And like just is going for the thing.
And you're doing it. I mean, honestly, that's what really attracts me to your podcast. And I'm like so into it because I'm like, okay, this feels empowering in the sense of seeing how you are creating and building your dream, and then also interviewing other people who are doing the same, like capturing that particular moment in your journey and your guest journey. I don't know. I just feel like that's really unique and is beautiful to pay attention to. And really, as a listener, feels very empowering. Like, okay, I can explore this too, and I can do this too. So I just really appreciate you creating that kind of space and doing it. So sharing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I also love to share with my audience how I know my guests too.
Sure. Yeah.
So we met at the Dreamers Loft for the last, not the last one, 2 Babes in Business events ago.
Yeah.
And I think I've just fallen in love with that group. There's so many incredible women. Was that your first time?
It was my first time. Yeah. I can't wait to go back. I'm so excited. The February one was sold out before I could like get into it. So that's okay. Hopefully March. But I know it's such an amazing group and just feels like you can feel the energy of a different type of business model or way of collaborating through business happening. And it just feels really amazing.
Yeah.
It's like you're in the middle of something blooming.
Yes. I think that was my second one that I had ever gone to.
Okay.
And what I fell in love with about that group is, first of all, just how eclectic the group is. Like there's so many types of women, so many types of entrepreneurs, and where they're at in their journey is so different. You have people like me who are just in their planting season, just getting started.
Sure.
And then you have people like 15 years in who are like doing the thing, but are talking about their pain points and being super transparent. And like, we're all, no matter where we're at, supporting each other. And then the collaboration that's been happening is unbelievable.
Yes. Well, and just as an avenue to learn about all of these different businesses happening and like what people are creating and being able to participate in that and benefit from that, like by just going to their events, like is so cool. So yeah, I agree.
It's so great. I was so inspired specifically by your story because one of the things we do at the event is we go around and we like share one by one, what's your name, what's your background, and like there's usually like different prompts every event. I can't remember what the prompt was for the Dreamers event.
Yeah, I think it was just like, what is your business and what do you, I don't know if there was a specific like prompt besides that.
Right, because the one last time it was really intimate because it was a snow day. So they did like, what was your goals for the next 30 days.
Oh, okay.
Almost to hold each other accountable for the next
That's
time we
cool.
see each other.
That's neat.
Yeah.
I don't think we had, I don't remember anything like that, but I could be forgetting it. So
I know it's so much has happened since the last one.
Yeah.
But I have a strong family background in education.
Okay.
A lot of my family are teachers or somehow in the education world.
Mhm.
So like when you talked about how your background was in education and like what you're doing with the inner peace, the self-awareness, the self-development, and like just helping teachers, because not only are they underpaid, they're also under, what's the right word? Like there really isn't a lot to help teachers in terms of helping them with their own development, in terms of their peace and life balance. You know, it's always putting others first and being almost like a public servant, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, I mean, that's really beautiful to be able to serve, right? And I think that a lot of people feel that way, especially teachers, like this is a calling, I am serving, and that's honorable. But at the same time, you know, it is not sustainable to constantly be serving and to erase your personhood, or to be in a culture that erases, you know, your needs as an individual person and then expects that to continue on. I mean, it creates a culture of burnout, which is what we see largely among teachers right now. And I would say, you know, since obviously that has been going on and being cultivated since before COVID, but especially during 2020 and then until this point too, like in the past 5 years have just seen this growing culture of burnout, really, where people are recognizing like this is not sustainable, like this is not a sustainable model of caregiving for this very important work that needs to be done. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'm trying to lean into now as someone who I taught for 10 years, public high school English, and love so much about it, but really found like, okay, this does not feel sustainable long term. And then just recognizing that within the collective system and as a whole, I really felt called to just create about that and like hold spaces where people can acknowledge that, because I think it's one of those things, in my experience, it's been one of those things that everyone kind of knows, but no one, teachers often like don't feel like they know what to do with it. And it's like, I'm just gonna like talk about it at lunch or, you know, in the break room or whatever, but then like back to business as usual. What can we do? And it's that like feeling of helplessness that really, you know, feels like that's part of what's keeping us stuck. So I just want to hold spaces where people can acknowledge one, that, and then what do we do beyond that, and start to grow and create so we can still do this important work, but in a more sustainable way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, firsthand, I know about how teachers are feeling and like the behind the scenes of they're humans too. They're not just teachers in front of the classroom.
Yeah.
There's so much more than just coming up with a lesson plan or report cards, right?
Right.
I mean, teachers are serving others, but if their own gas tank isn't full, it's going to be really hard for them to show up as their best selves and to influence and to inspire. So my mom's a teacher. She's been teaching, oh gosh, for over 30 years. I don't even know how long, but she's been teaching for a long, long time. She teaches first grade. She loves it. It's her soul. She, you know, she doesn't get paid to anything, but she's like, it doesn't matter. She feels called to it. She feels she's doing her soul's purpose, which is such a gift to be able to find a job that like work is work. Work is stressful, but to feel that passion is so inspiring. And then both of my brothers are actually teachers as well.
Yes.
And my oldest brother, he and I are more the type A's. My middle brother is more of the chill one, who he'll get stuff done. He's a hard worker, but he's like, everything's gonna be all right. Like it's not that big of a deal. Yeah. But me and my oldest brother, Chaim, we are both just overachievers, highly competitive, really giving to others, but then also like really hard on ourselves.
Sure. And
so my brother, to the point where talking about like giving and not really taking care of his own health. And I know this is something a lot of teachers deal with, where not even taking the time to go to the bathroom.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. My brother doesn't even drink coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
He'll take caffeine pills.
Oh my gosh.
Because coffee makes him have to pee.
Yes.
And so he's like, I don't want to have to leave the classroom. So he doesn't drink enough water. He doesn't have coffee. He'll just, my middle brother has coffee. He's like, it's fine. They'll be fine.
They can wait.
They can wait. But like, he's good at that boundary. But there are a lot of teachers out there who aren't and who will go to those extreme lengths, like taking a caffeine pill instead of coffee.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think it's important to recognize too, that's like, yeah, that's an individual choice, but to look out at the larger culture that makes that the norm. You know what I mean? Like, I think our traditional education systems in general come out of this consciousness or I guess consciousness of disembodiment, to where it's like, oh, to be my best self as a teacher or a learner, I have to just be in my mind. And like my body is just kind of in the way. You know what I mean? Like my body is here transporting my mind around, and that's really all it needs to do. My mind has to think and solve this problem or write this essay or figure this out. And so then, yeah, that create that kind of culture in the schools, and how I think the school system, you know, creates like pushes teachers then to do things like, well, I'm not going to take in the nutrients I need or enough hydration because I don't want to have to take care of bodily needs throughout the day because there's no time for it. When it's like, we could schedule a longer passing period. You know, we could make it a norm and have a person who can always come in to stand in the classroom for 5 minutes while the teacher goes to the bathroom. Like, that would not be hard to figure out. You know what I mean? But it's like, we just, when teachers are like so busy in just the regular tasks of the job, which is, you know, often teachers stay late to do the tasks and often work through their lunch and their prep and all of that, because you are essentially performing, you know, for 7 hours of the day with your students. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to an office and then you're just working on whatever you need to work on. You perform, and then you still need to do all the prep for the performance too. And the grading and the assessment and the feedback and the calls home. And so it's like, where is the time? So anyway, in saying all that, my point is, because teachers are often so busy, there's often not a lot of time to problem solve. Like, okay, I am really disconnected from my body. What do I do about that? You know, or how could our system be different? So that's what I hope to do, is hold spaces very intentionally. You know, that being one of the problems I would say could be addressed in our educational spaces. And I mean, how much better would our learning spaces be if it was easy and not a problem to just address your body whenever you needed to, you know? And it's like, that's not hard for us to figure out. So on that note, I really like Hillary McBride's work, The Wisdom of Our Bodies. And she just, in her work and research, is highlighting how our body is not this like inanimate thing, but it's like, it is itself a source of being and wisdom that we know from. And to take care of it and nurture it is to help our whole selves like learn and grow. So also, I'm always fascinated with and learning from Sonia Renee Taylor, her work. She's a poet, writer, activist, and she just talks about, you know, why do we think the way we do about our bodies? Like, where does this come out of in our, like in our American consciousness? And she specifically makes the point, like looking at American history and all of its messiness and oppression, like we have a foundation of slavery in this country that is a system of oppressing bodies. And so this idea of, well, it doesn't matter what the body needs, we just need it to work more. And so she says, when we engage with our bodies in present day with that same consciousness, like that's coming out of that foundational consciousness of like, wow, I just need to push my body further rather than listen to it and respect it and see what it actually needs. So that kind of went in another direction there, but just speaking to the point of, yeah, I would agree that there's often a culture of disembodiment in our traditional learning spaces.
Yeah.
And the work I do now, I reimagine with teachers like, well, what does teaching through embodiment look like? Where you're listening to your body and to your mind and seeing the interconnectedness between these two things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So going back a little bit,
Sure.
I'm so curious to know because, you know, sometimes when we're fresh out of high school and we're going to college, there's so many options of what we're supposed to do with the rest of our lives.
Yes.
And you still haven't even developed yourself as a person. So the fact that at like 18, 19 years old, you're supposed to make this major life decision and spend this exorbitant amount of money on a career path. And like, I don't know the exact percentage, but I would guess that like probably over 50% of what people went to school for and got their degrees in, they're not even doing that anymore.
Sure.
I would like to think that nothing's a waste. And so even if you pivoted, whatever experience you've gotten, whether it's from your degree or whatever careers you've done, will build with you and you can use elements of it. But you said that you had done teaching like firsthand in high school. Or not, you weren't in high school, you were teaching in high school for 11 years. So was that the first career that you went to school for, like back in college?
Yes. Yep. This was well, I shouldn't say my original plan, but like, yes, this was my career.
Yeah.
And I will say similar to you and your brother, like as a kid, like very much loved to like be organized and like have a plan. And you know, anytime like playing, I would be like the teacher. Like I loved the idea of learning, like always growing up. So that always resonated with me. And I felt in many ways, and there's more to get into with this, I guess, perhaps down the road, but like in many ways, school worked for me as a kid. And
it does for type A's.
It does. Yes. And I'm not going to say that that was all maybe healthy for like my holistic development as a person, but at the time it did. And I enjoyed school. So I loved to like pretend to be the teacher and everything when I was little. So that was always there. And then getting like in my later years in high school, I really just found a lot of meaning and purpose in my English classes. I love to write. I love creative writing, especially. And that just felt really powerful to me. So then going into college, I thought, well, maybe I want to actually go into social work because I really value like working in a community and like doing these tangible things. Like I want to do something that's actually kind of like on the ground, making a difference. You know what I mean? And then as I kind of explored those classes, realized, well, maybe that's not quite for me. Like that, I don't know, doesn't feel like it's bringing the energy back to me as well. So in my English classes still in college, you know, you have to take like general English classes at the beginning, and really loved those, loved my professors, felt so empowered by like this practice of writing specifically, whether it was creative or more even research based or whatever. So I thought, well, this is a way I want to be really tangibly engaged with my local communities is through teaching in a public school setting, and specifically English, because that's where I was finding my passion and this creative outlet. So that led me to that. And then I went to SIUE for my undergrad and fell in love with like all of my English professors. They're so amazing. Shout out to the English department at SIUE. But yeah, just they're really did just an amazing job of not only holding space to explore like the literature and the writing and all of that together, but really empowering, I felt like empowering me as a student too.
Yeah.
And then did that and then started teaching. And then while I was teaching, went back to SIUE for my master's degree as well. And that's specifically in teaching writing. So getting to do more of a deep dive in like, why do we teach writing the way we do? And like, where did this come from? And
so already you were questioning the system.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like really grateful for once again, the professors I had that opened up those ways of thinking for me and like showing me text and asking questions. and holding space for me to like grapple with that. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have really questioned the system in a direct, pointed way that I'm doing now. In fact, I know I wouldn't have, right? I mean, maybe somewhere else along the way I would have learned that lesson, but I'm really grateful for learning it in that space. So, which I guess to kind of add on to that real quick, like speaks to the power of learning, right? And learning collectively.
Yeah.
And learning in these shared spaces and learning from others. So to me, what I've been kind of tangling with is navigating the transformative power of teaching and learning with the oppressive or harmful or unhelpful patterns of our existing systems.
Yeah.
Right. And seeing those as separate. Right. And then what do we do with those two things? How do we heal them? And so that way we can still do this really amazing, useful, necessary human thing of learning. I mean, that's our most fundamental, one of our fundamental things. Like you look at a baby or any child and they are, they're eating and they're going to the bathroom and they're learning, so they're connecting, they're communicating. So it's so essential. And I think we need public spaces. So anyway, going back to just my story of leaning into that, then so then that has kind of led me through my 10 years of teaching. And I've taught in my first couple of years were in like rural spaces, rural public schools. And then the latter half of my career was in more of a very diverse suburban area teaching there. So yeah.
Definitely had a lot of experience in different areas too.
Yes.
I think this is an idea that I've been playing around with kind of the past week. That like there's this idea that I've heard I have a podcast, but it started because I'm a consumer of podcasts first. I have so many podcasts that I listen to and I'm still discovering. And I love the concept. I love that area. And a topic that a lot of them that I've been listening to recently, it's been in alignment that I'm supposed to hear this message, talking about this concept of curiosity.
Oh, yes.
And I think that can be applied into so many avenues, but I think that there's two parts to human nature, right?
Yeah.
There's the part of us that is curious to learn. Life is super fascinating. We just naturally, I think, wonder about things. And then there's also the part of us that wants to be comfortable, even if that comfort isn't comfortable, if it's something we're used to. It's our comfort zone.
Yes.
So even if we want more, better, different, we know that that's going to be hard. And I think the older we get, we have this expectation that by our 30s, by our 40s, we're going to kind of fall into some sort of easy mode.
Yeah.
We hustled and now we've got what we needed. But life is all about challenge. It's all about growth. And if you don't keep this mentality of curiosity, I think that's when things get hard.
Yeah.
And even with like self-love and fear that we have, instead of feeling fear about certain things, if we can lean into the curiosity behind that emotion, it can help us navigate that. And so bringing that all back into what we were just discussing, I've always been fascinated by like what people do and the random jobs and that are in the world and how do people even think of this, you know? And so this concept of like what you're doing, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's building on your experience, right? Because you are, from the sounds of it, like a type A. The system worked for you as a student, but you had teachers who taught you to be curious, to think differently. And then you actually got into the world of teaching. You taught for 11 years, right?
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
And like a decade is a long time to be in any career path.
Sure.
So that's plenty of time to like know your feelings. And you worked in different environments as well. So you could see certain overlapping like behaviors or issues, right? So what I'm curious to know is like, as a teacher even, I think it could be hard to shift careers, to leave that path because there's so much identity that you have wrapped around it.
Yeah.
So what was the driving force that pushed you to be like, okay, yes, something should be done. I need to be the one to do something about it.
Yeah.
Because that's rare.
Yes. Well, and honestly, it was a very hard decision. Like all of, the 10th year of my teaching career, I'm like grappling with this in a really deep way. Like it was not like I woke up and I'm like, yeah, that's my next step and I'm confidently going to do it. Like I really thought, well, and honestly, I was thinking about this for more than just the final year, that I was teaching.
For sure.
But really exploring like, okay, this doesn't feel sustainable. What does that mean? But it's not possible. Like really myself feeling trapped in this mindset of like, well, it's a good job. Like I'm in a good district. I love what I do.
The people you work with.
Yes, the
your
people
students.
I work with. Exactly. It was great. My students were amazing. Like honestly, truly they were. The parents in my district, fantastic to work with. Like
and on top of that,
yes,
you're married, you have a kid, right? One on the way now, but before then, you did not, right? And so it's just more of like there's that adult responsibility of we have bills to pay.
Exactly.
It's not just me. I've got a family whose my actions are going to affect them too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I really noticed, so I mean all of that, and I'm like really, working with that, thinking how can I make this make sense? And is this responsible? What can I do outside of this? But I didn't want to to me, it felt really bad to just leave and be like, well, I'm going to go do something totally different, which there's nothing wrong with that. Like some people choose that to leave teaching and do something totally different. And that's fine. But for me, I felt like I'm really passionate about these issues, but it just didn't feel sustainable for me as a parent at the time, but still, as a parent and as a teacher who was wanting to do transformative things in my classroom, to really show up for both of those things in a way that felt mutually sustainable. And once again, I'm not saying that's true for everyone. That's just what was true for me and my personality and what I feel called to do. So I knew I wanted to work with these topics much more intentionally, but do it in a way that also sustained my mental and physical and holistic health as a person, right? Because if, like you said earlier, if the individual isn't healthy, then what can you really fully give? What kind of energy are you putting out into your work or your creation or in your relationships?
Well, especially you, if you're preaching this concept of embodiment, taking care of yourself, you need to be an example. You need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly. Well, and this was before I was really like fully doing that. You know what I mean? So then I had this idea, like still teaching. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to kind of like what you said with your podcast, right? I'm just going to play around and be curious, like what would happen if I just pull some of these ideas together and like, what could I create out of this? So I start doing that and I'm like, okay, what could I do? Once again, that's like a practical, helpful thing for teachers to address these topics. And so not to say a book isn't practical, obviously as an English teacher, I love books and I'm here for all of them. Well, I'm here for many of them, but I wanted to do something that was like create something that was a usable tool. So I had this idea of what if I create this planner that helps teachers really embody these concepts, pay attention to these aspects of the school system, and then not be stuck in this like negative space, but really replace some unhelpful patterns with things that are really helpful for your nervous system, for your creativity, for liberating practices within your classroom, and really just create this space of resources. So I'm like, well, I don't know what this will be. I'm just going to play around, and just started drafting and pulling this together. And before I know it, I mean, this was maybe 2 years ago in the spring, started pulling together just this draft of like what this kind of planner could be. And as I worked on it, it just became more clear. And then worked on that throughout the past year, found like some amazing resources to like help me find a printer and find a designer and things like that, and like make this actually come to life. And so when I could leaned into my own creative process and my own curiosity,
Yes.
I was able to create something new. And then in that creative process, seeing this tangible thing that it's like, oh, I made this. And like, this is saying what I want it to say.
Yes.
Even though I feel like I'm very much in the midst of still creating it and like working with the ideas, like it doesn't feel totally perfect, and that's part of what I'm working on is like, oh, letting what I'm creating be shared even before I feel like it's 100%, perfect,
Yes.
and getting away from that perfectionism as an ideal, but more of like, this feels authentic and meaningful and powerful to say. So I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
So leaning into that space. So that's what I did. And then as I was creating this planner, feeling more and more confident in myself and my own creative practices and thinking like, well, what else is possible? What else could I do? That still works with this in a new kind of way. And trusting my own creative energy and just the creative energy and potential of humans in general, right? Like, rather than trusting fully the system to take care of me. You know what I mean? So yeah, and not to say in that process that it was just like, oh, I've created it and it's easy. I was still like, there was lots of anxiety that I listened to and worked with and paid attention to, and yes, but that's what kind of helped me ease out of this system and into something that feels more aligned with myself. And once again, I don't think that's the path for everyone, but for me, that's where my creative practice led me. And so in the planner that I created, it's called the Praxis Plan Book.
Yes, I have it right here.
Yay.
I'm going to link it in the bio so people can see it because it's, first of all, so well thought out.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
But it's also, I'm from my graphic design background. Yes. It's so well laid out. It's beautiful. And just the detail, I'm a gold girly, so love the coil. And it has you open it up and it has this gorgeous pattern. There's this little folder where you can put anything personal. And immediately the first thing that it says is breathe in, breathe out. That's the first thing I do every morning to just calm my nervous system because my brain's going in a million different directions. Yeah. And even though I have a to-do list, sometimes it could be that functional freeze. Yeah. Where you're like, okay, I know that I have all these productive things I need to do, but goodness, am I overwhelmed? Right. So just to breathe is the most practical thing. But I'll let you talk more on this, but I'm so impressed with this. And I am not a teacher, but I want you to create another version like this for entrepreneurs or just people in general, because I think your teaching mindset plus your organization skills plus just understanding human beings and how they think in your journey. I think this could be applied in so many different directions, but that's the fun part about entrepreneurship. You start with one concept and then you never know where that can lead you. But before we go into this a little bit more, I wanted to say that there's this concept that my business partner taught me last week, where when you have this dream or this idea, a lot of times you don't know where to start. And it could feel very overwhelming because you have this idea that, oh, I need to have it all together and I need to be perfect and everything needs to be laid out just so before the public can see it, because God forbid I should look stupid. And the other thing is that you're never going to have that confidence until you're done. Competence creates confidence. You're not going to have confidence beforehand, and you have to do it and do it scared. And the other thing is I told him, I'm there's not one day that I wake up and I don't think about Le Cafe, my coffee brand. And he's just great. What are you doing about it? Yeah. Every day, do actionable steps. And it doesn't have to be big things. It could be writing it out. It could be sending emails. It could be coming up with some sort of strategy plan for the week and having that accountability. You don't have to be perfect and it doesn't have to be complete. But if you are putting that energy out into the world, those opportunities will naturally align. They'll come into play. You'll think of an idea, the right ad, the right, inspiration will come across. You'll meet these people who are exactly who you needed at the time. Yes. Action will inspire more action that will lead you to where exactly you need to go. Exactly. This organic birthing of each moment
rather than this control. And I have to know exactly what it's going to be and be able to see it fully fleshed out versus this just I'm taking steps and I'm doing it.
Yep.
Right. And there's a middle between those two things too, of course, but like, I'm totally with you. And speaking to that perfectionism and like unlearning it, that's one thing I talk about in the workbook section of my planner. It's like, yeah, perfectionism is wired into our school systems in so many ways, right? Like, what would it be like if us today as entrepreneurs and I'm in my 30s, I think you're in your 20s. So in our 20s and 30s, didn't have to unlearn perfectionism because it wasn't ingrained into us for 12 plus years.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, what would that childhood be like? What would that experience of learning be like if it wasn't clouded by perfectionism through practices like, hierarchical grading or like encouraging, like, I mean, the best is like an A+, right? Like that's what kids are encouraged to do. And even if individual teachers are like, hey, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Lots of teachers say that. Right. And so I don't want to discount that. Like teachers embody that, but at the same time, when you say that, but the practices aren't aligned with that, then that one creates confusion for kids. And two, still instills this like behavior or embodiment of perfectionism. So yeah, I'm totally with you. And also myself, like unlearning that and learning to just be in the process. And even like you said about the space of entrepreneurship, it does give you so much room to just like play and explore and let things be birthed and created as they want to be.
But I don't want to take away from the fact that there's a side of entrepreneurship that you only really know about if you're an entrepreneur, where it's like sometimes daily, but at least once a week, this concept of anxiety.
Yeah.
And this concept of, am I doing the right thing? Questioning your life's choices. Maybe I should go get a quote unquote big girl job and go back to the responsible, structured way of being successful. Yeah. Because there's a roadmap there.
Yeah.
When you're an entrepreneur, the difficulty is there is no roadmap or guideline. Like, we kind of all try to help each other and give each other advice, but like you had some creative idea that's uniquely yours. Mm-hmm. And it's not like there aren't other people doing some brand version of you, but they could steal your recipe, but it won't taste the same, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You have a special soul, purpose, vision. Yours is going to be uniquely yours. There's a driving force that's uniquely yours. And that energy is going to make your product, your business different, right? I think one of the smartest things about what you did is you started, same as what I did with like cafes, starting with a tangible product.
Yeah.
Because when you have a tangible product, being able to hand this planner to someone and be like, let's start here.
Yes.
This is a beginning. And then like, of course, I think you have like a much bigger vision of what you can do.
Sure.
Right? Like even just this conversation right now, and I think I mentioned this at our coffee too, I could see you having a podcast.
Yeah.
And I think that would be another channel of how you can help educators, help teachers, help parents and students. There's like so many ways I think you can go about that, whether it's doing like solo episodes of just small clippets of like 15 minutes every week, sharing like valuable advice. So that's not too time consuming for you, but adds value for others that people will look forward to, or doing more long format interviews with different people who can teach and maybe even you challenging the way that they're thinking.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot you can do, but I want to go back into the plan book and talk more about like what your thought process is with creating it, structuring it, what your hope is for it moving forward.
Yeah. Well, in the structure of it and creating it, the first part of the planner is a workbook. So kind of walking through, I created a framework called Embodied Wellness. And then this framework has 6 parts, and it is kind of the guide for the workbook to kind of help organize, because it is a lot. Like this is a lot to take in on top of already being busy and like doing all the things. So I wanted to make these topics like tangible, accessible, and in a way that, I don't know, we can like see them more in bite-sized pieces and how they all work together rather than just like, here's all the information. So I created that framework, and then that's the outline for the workbook in there. So it starts with naming toxic patterns, practicing real self-care, which is things like setting boundaries, accessing your power, dealing with difficult feelings like guilt, right? Because like teacher guilt, for sure. Oh my gosh, I should be grading. I should be doing this or whatever. So like that is the type of self-care that I talk about in this planner versus maybe, and that's based on Pooja Lakshman's work. And she calls that real self-care versus faux self-care, which is like, oh, I just need to like, take a bubble bath, which nothing wrong with that, obviously, but that's maybe just going to help us cope with.
It's a Band-Aid.
Yes, versus like actually heal and care for ourselves.
This is the first time anyone's ever brought that concept up.
Oh, interesting. Like real and fake self-care.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Because if you're stressed out and you take a bubble bath, if you're lucky, you'll relax for whatever amount of time that you choose to spend in there. But I'm thinking about for myself even because I have done that where I'm like, I need to relax. And so I've gone to take a bath and I've lit the candles and I've either a music or a podcast playing or sometimes just silence depending on what I need. And I never could understand it, but I never felt calm.
Yes.
I actually, maybe this is my type A, not knowing how to like chill out.
Yeah.
But like I would be in the bubble bath and at first I'd be like, I am zen, I am calm. And then something would like hit me where I'm like, no, I'm not. I really have stuff to do. I'm like, I need to get out of here. And then I would just like take a shower and be like, I'm done. I can't. Like, I don't have time for this. I'm so overwhelmed. And I think it was because like there's nothing wrong. If you want to take a bubble bath, like do it. But I think now this explains why I never quite felt comforted by a bubble bath or things like it. Because in my head, unless I truly was in a calm space, a bubble bath for me doesn't solve my problem. Yeah. It's just a distraction and taking me away from what I need to tackle that's stressing me out.
And what does our culture say about that? Oh, well, you need to buy this $15 bath bomb. And once again, not hating on bath bombs. I love them. Okay. But but you need to buy this thing. You need to buy these expensive towels. You need to buy these candles. You need to buy this, whatever to make this relaxing experience happen.
Right.
So then it becomes just like this practice that's really fueling, I would say, our dominant system of capitalism, still not really challenging the status quo in any way.
Yeah.
Supporting it. And then you still feel bad, like in the long term. So so she calls that faux self-care.
I love that.
Because it doesn't challenge the systems that are making us unwell in the first place. And so real self-care then does do that. It's like, how do I set up my life so that way I don't have to constantly recover from it?
Ooh, yes. Yes, that's the goal.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so, so I talk about that in my framework and then move into practicing a love ethic, which is based on Bell Hooks's work. She writes a lot about like the educational sphere and she specifically focuses on like academia and post-secondary education, but applying that then to the secondary sphere of like high school learning and teaching. So I explore like what a love ethic is, what it isn't, because that can be so muddled in our culture and like often disregarded. The next part is practicing or integrating the external and the internal. So like listening to your nervous system and then like taking steps to, care for your nervous system and like do what it's telling you need in the world. And then also embodying your values rather than the values of the dominant system that you're going to step into. So how do you get clear on what your values are as a teacher and as a person, and then teach and live through those versus whatever the school district is that you're in. And then the next step would be imagining new possibilities. So that's really inviting people into their creative practice. And like, that's so broad, right? Creativity doesn't have to be painting or drawing, right? For me, I love that type of creativity.
Same.
But it can be so many things, right?
Yes.
You can be building, you can be cooking, you can be writing, you can be photographing, you can be wiring something, coding something. I mean, it's endless, right? That's the point. So inviting people into more of a contemplative creative practice, like very aware of like, how am I, just what could I do to let my voice come out? basically.
Yeah.
And even if you don't know what your inner voice is going to say, and it might not say something every time, but like holding the space to let it say something, or even hear what your internal voice is saying, I think is really important. And then in that too, like living into this sense of curiosity, like we were talking about before.
Yeah.
And then finally, the last piece of that framework is taking action for liberation. So within your classroom, like what does that look like? What do liberatory teaching practices look like? What could they look like for yourself and with students? And I would say I really emphasize that's something you're co-creating with students, because if you are going into it thinking, well, I'm going to liberate all these kids who are stuck in this, whatever, then that's not really liberation, right? Because it's this paternalistic, I'm doing this for you, versus we're co-creating this together and recognizing how is this also hurting me and what can we do together to transform it? Not to throw it away, not to demonize it, but to continue that transformation. And so I set this framework up I graphically organize it just in a circle, and I mentioned that like go through this like a spiral. Like this isn't a checklist, like a 1 through 6 and I got it and I'm done and everything's better. But like, this is something you kind of engage with throughout a lifetime, like in this spiral fashion, and you can move through it slowly or quickly or in whichever way you need at the time. So that's the first part. And then the second half of the planner, I have resources like mapping out like your themes or topics for the entire semester, holding space for like your students' information. What are their pronouns? What are their hobbies? What are their interests? What's their 504 plan? And having all of that information right there. So then as you plan, you're planning with your students in mind versus I have this plan and these random students anyone can plug into it, but it's more of like a way to just make it easier for teachers to plan for those particular students, which I know teachers do in general, right? But for me, in my experience, it was like, well, I have notes about this over here, and then I have a file here with this, and then on the electronic attendance system, I have this information about them. So I'm like, I just need this all in one place where I'm doing my planning. So I have all that, and then actual planning pages that can do like a holistic overview. And then in addition to just like the general course blocks that you might find in like any basic teacher planner, there's also specific blocks for how am I resting? How am I creating? How am I completing stress cycles? And the like last one's escaping me right now, but something else based on the information in the workbook. So you're integrating your own wellness like into this plan, in addition to just like, what am I doing, in this lesson particularly?
So I have a question about, so how does the teacher integrate that into the classroom with the students? Like what would be a practical example or examples of like what that would look like?
Well, that's a great question. And so I'll just say sometimes like their creative practice might be in the classroom and it might be out of it.
Okay.
So those things too might not be all at once,
right?
But it might just be like in the timeline of my day, this is what I'm doing. But if it would be in the classroom, like for example, rest. Okay. So one thing that I started doing in my classroom and then really fell in love with just because of what I could see doing in my classroom is a mindfulness practice. So I would start every day with 2 minutes of mindfulness, and it didn't take a lot of time. It was easy. But that just became our routine in our classroom. And I explained it to students like, you're busy. School is hard. You are doing so much. And then you run across campus. Like the school I was at had a huge campus. It was gorgeous and beautiful and had lots of like outside spaces.
Cool.
But I'm like, it was so cool. But I'm like, okay, this is a huge campus and you're hustling to get here in 5 minutes, like up these 3 flights of stairs with a backpack. Like I'm out of breath just doing that. So anyway, I would say, you are busy as a student, not only in this passing period right before, but you have so much going on in life, right? You have relationships, you have a job, you have, what you're working on in your for your future and all of this stuff. mental health stuff, just you're bringing all of that with you. So I say, we're going to take 2 minutes at the beginning of class every day to just breathe. And I do some kind of like, like a tiny guided meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, you can kind of follow along with what I'm saying, or you can totally ignore me and take a nap. You do what's best for you. Either way, we're just going to have like a 2-minute
just
pause.
a moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's a way to integrate a restful practice into a standard teaching hour on a regular basis, right? And it's not that like, okay, we're all going to like take the whole hour and take a nap every day, because that's not practical or helpful, I don't think.
No.
But expanding, and I do this in the planner too, of like expanding what is that idea of rest. Trisha Hersey has an amazing book called Rest as Resistance. Yes. And I think her new book is called We Will Resist or We Will Rest. It's something along those lines, and I should look it up. But her work is amazing. And I've really drawn on her work as she expanded this definition of rest for me. So that would be a way, you can easily integrate that into, a traditional lesson, I would say. And so now, and that's one of the things I do now is like teaching teachers how to bring mindfulness into the classroom. So now I'm also a meditation teacher.
Cool.
I've like done my certification and that, and I host community meditation groups and all of that. So I know that can be kind of intimidating though, and like kind of weird, at the beginning if you're not used to it or comfortable with it yourself. So I hold space and work with teachers and how, if you want to teach something like this or do something like this in your classroom, like how do you get started? What do you do? What resources are there? So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking back to an example that you just reminded me of, this memory that I have from high school. My English teacher actually did this.
Yes.
The high school that I went to was very small. There was 25 girls in the whole school.
Wow.
8 girls in my class.
Wow.
And it was very academic, and there was super religious. And we weren't allowed to talk to boys. The school had that rule.
In the school you weren't?
It's an all-girls school.
Okay.
And we weren't allowed to talk to boys, period.
Oh.
That was part of like the religiousness of the school.
Gotcha.
You could get in trouble with the school if they found out that you had a boyfriend or that you were even friends with guys. So it was pretty strict. And there would even be like people in the community who would like tell on you if they saw that you were like, so you definitely felt watched.
Yeah. The surveillance.
Always. Even if you were not actually in school, you were being watched. And it's almost like you signed this contract when you went into this particular school that you represented. Yeah. Even if you were not in school during school hours, there was a certain expectation for how you were going to conduct yourself. So the stakes were high. I'm already a type A. Going to this type of school.
That's stressful.
Yeah, it's stressful for anyone, but especially if you're a type A and you have this idea of like, I want to be the best. And society, your culture, your school is telling you this is the best. This is the prototype, right? And so even if I have people in my life, which I did, my parents were not that strict, know, and like I did have teachers along the way who were more balanced. But like if the overall voice and structure is saying this is excellence. And sure, in theory, everybody's great, but you're looking at it and you're like, are they though? Because that's not the story I'm being told, right? And so I was on like an academic scholarship and I really wanted to be valedictorian. So for me, there was no room for error, right? I was in it to win it. And especially, oh God, I don't even remember what grade we were in, but there was like, after school, they would keep us really busy with extracurriculars as well. And charity and like all these things. So they didn't want us talking to boys and they didn't want us getting in trouble. And they were very into like self-development, which is great, but it was like on steroids.
Wow.
Which there's so many benefits that I've gotten from that kind of schooling. But then there's also the burnout element of it, because you can only run that hard, that fast for so long. And I remember there was one point that we all came in and like my English teacher, I guess she just felt the energy. She felt that we were all just zapped. And she was like, we're going to take a moment. We had couches in the back of our room. It must have been 12th grade because like we had couch. That was like the perks of being a senior. Oh, yeah. We would all fall asleep on them all the time because we were literally so
you're exhausted.
Out.
Yes.
Like there'd be times we'd be up to like 2 a.m, like doing homework, doing all these things. Like it was insane. And school was long. Like it was we started 8:30 a.m. and then we went till 4 or 5 p.m.
Wow.
In addition,
and then did extracurriculars
afterwards.
Yeah.
Like gym and art were after school. So the days we
Okay.
did gym and art, it would be from 4 to 5.
Which, can I just jump in and say something there?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? The class that's about your body and the class that's about like a creative, like in a very intentionally traditional creative outlet are extra.
And so we were resentful of those classes because
you learn to resent your body and your creative practice. Because it's more work you have to do.
Exactly. Yes. I've been in school all day. I'm like, I have homework, I have assignments, or I just want to watch my favorite show. We weren't supposed to watch TV, but I was doing it behind the scenes because I needed to just zone out.
Yes.
Right? Like that was my big rebellion in high school, that I would watch movies.
Yes.
You know, but like, which just goes to show that there's always going to be some act of rebellion when you're a teenager. It's just funny that when like the stakes are higher, it seems innocent what we did, but for back then, that was like so risky.
So scary.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like God forbid someone should find out that we watched TV or listened to music that wasn't Jewish.
Yes.
But, you know, it's just a different world. And that's why my friends would be like, you're like a cultural immigrant, because I would come into the world at college and I was like so used to running on this like high end that we were told real life is going to be easy compared to high school, which is nuts, but whatever. So anyways, so this, back to the story, the teacher, she was like, everybody go lay down on the couches. You need to zen out, which our brains were like, what does that even mean? Like to relax?
What's happening?
That sounded stress. Like our bodies were having like this visceral reaction to even just the thought of chilling in the middle of the day.
It was dangerous.
It was dangerous.
It was dangerous. Your body knew that it was dangerous to relax for that minute because of the larger culture.
Literally. Yes. And so we were laying down on the couch and she put on some sort of Zen music or classical music. I don't remember what. She used to put on classical music too when we would read or write like during class, which I loved.
I did that.
She created this space. And I think that's why I always loved English, because my soul, I think, needed this rest. Yeah. But I never was taught how to rest. Yeah. And so it's like, you're right. Like it felt dangerous, but yet there was something intriguing about it. But I'm like, but I don't have time for it. But there's something to this. Yeah. But maybe I'll get to it later. Yeah. I've got things to do and maybe I'll rest when I'm done with my things, without realizing that you need both. Yes. You need to be productive, but you also need to figure out rest in there. And so we laid down on the couch and she did this mindfulness practice with us where she has close our eyes, which is so uncomfortable. And then she like had us imagine that there was like this orange liquid that was like coming through our head and like coming down through us and like to our toes. And like that was my first experience with any sort of meditation or like mindfulness. And I was like, okay, I'll never forget it, because I literally felt my body relax for the first time in an intentional way. Not because I truly was relaxed. I learned to calm down my nervous system, and I had never done that before. Yes. And that was such a weird experience. And it was probably a good, I don't know, at least 5-10 years later until I actually did that again. Yeah. But I still remember that first experience. Our gym teacher was super creative because she knew we were all didn't want to be there. So she would do things from like Zumba classes to like yoga to whatever she could get us to just want to be active, because we didn't want to be active. Because again, we had things to do, assignments, tests, you know, responsibilities, even our own personal lives, like you said. Yeah. And then to stay for like another 45 minutes to an hour was just...
That's so exhausting.
It's exhausting. We all used to say, we love this concept of gym and art. Why can't we do this at like 11 a.m. when we need a break in the middle of the day? Instead of having us have this packed day of like Hebrew curriculum in the morning and then English curriculum in the afternoon. We had 16 courses that we took in high school. Wow. Like that's insane. That's a lot. Know? Your brain's going from Hebrew in the morning to English in the afternoon. And like I remember the English courses was like math. It was math, science, history, and what am I blanking on? Math, science, history. Oh, and English. Literature. Okay. Yeah. And so we would do time blocks for each class. The English classes were an hour and a half. And so you'd only have like English and science on one day, and then the next day would be the next two, and you would swap.
Flip-flop. Yeah.
It was insane. It was insane.
Yeah.
There was so much. Yeah.
And that's tricky. And it's like you said, it's not all bad and it's not all good. You know what I mean? Like it's in this complex middle space. And also it's like, well, you're also learning about Jewish culture too, which is, you know, very important culturally. Yeah. And so that's the question. It's like, well, how do we hold space for kids to learn about cultural history and maybe practice or, engage in history, science, English, whatever, and like do that in a way that's sustainable. And that's the question. It's like, this can't be the only thing we can come up with, right? Like as humans, look at what we've created. Like there's so many crazy things in the world. This can't be the only model that we could think of for this, right?
And
it's
look
not
at the world now too. Like as adults, we are craving mindfulness.
Yes.
There is a mindfulness movement, especially since COVID, because so many people struggled with their mental health.
Yeah.
Like it just magnified the issue that was at hand.
Well, and like you said, it's a skill. You know what I mean? Like you're like, oh, it didn't like totally make everything in my life feel relaxed, but it was like I was intentionally practicing this skill that what led me into being able to do it in that moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. We write things off culturally because the dominant American culture is so focused on production and making more, and like progress is bigger and better, and like I have more money, and like all the things like under our systems, things like rest or paying attention to your body are seen as like kind of superfluous and like silly, like childish. You know what I mean? Like that's cute. That's so cute. But we don't do that here because we're serious and we need to get things done. When
it's like a luxury.
Yes. And then who can afford it? You know what I mean? And so the people who need it the most, like have this narrative that I can't afford it or I can't take time to do it. And so that's what I really love about Tricia Hersey's work, is that she talks about from different class perspectives, she talks about snatching rest. Okay. And so like, she's like, the system isn't going to give it to you necessarily. You have to find ways to snatch rest for yourself.
Love that.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to this retreat for a week, or I'm, taking a 3-hour nap every day. Like, I mean, it could be, but it doesn't have to be that. Right. And so, and you said something else in your story too, that I thought was really interesting, that I think about a lot too, how this narrative of like, the real world will be easier than this. And it's, I think I hear that all the time as a teacher. And that's something I think about is, well, isn't this the real world too? Wow. Isn't this the real world for students?
I got chills just now.
Yes. I mean, really. And it's like, we write it off because students are children. Their bodies are smaller. They're still developing or whatever, like they're just tiny people. So we don't give them as much weight, but like, this is their real world.
It's almost like you're hazing them.
Yes.
Because you had the same experience. This was your education system.
Yes. Yeah. So it's replaying the same trauma in a sense.
Yeah.
Because this is what's comfortable for my nervous system. So I'm going to reenact that. Yes. And well, going back to what you asked earlier is like, well, how did I kind of come to this in my professional work? I mean, the experience, my son is 5.5 now. He will be sad if I don't say that and a half, but so he's 5.5. And in my journey of learning how to parent, which is also a skill, it's not just like, well, you just do it, but, and parent and reparent myself in that journey, because parenting can be so triggering in so many ways. It's like, I had to unlearn, things from my own upbringing that maybe weren't as helpful in my relationship with my parents, and try to do that differently and like make my nervous system feel like it's okay to do this differently as a parent. I think the same concept applies in any caregiving profession, but in this case, teaching and education. What were the patterns that I was brought up with and kind of live in my subconscious that feel comfortable to me? Whether that's like grading in a certain way, or controlling my classroom in a certain way, or maintaining this hierarchy that feels really safe and comfortable, but actually aren't helpful and actually are toxic practices. So to kind of reparent, reteach yourself as a teacher, I guess, feels like such necessary work. Otherwise we do just transmit whatever our teachers did. And some of that, once again, some of that's good. Some of that is not helpful,
Right.
So, but just thinking about this is the real world as well. Yep. And that speaks to that same idea of that separation. When we separate our mind and our body, then it's not hard to make the cognitive leap to, well, this work that I'm doing is also separate from the real world. it's like, no, this is also the real world, and what we do here matters. So,
the minute you were born, you were in the real world.
Yes. And so that speaks to like this idea of like our systems are separate, when it's like, no, we can integrate them and integrate our humanness within them too.
I love that. Jumping back in, I had an experience recently on New Year's Eve, which is always really like, I think whenever you're starting something new, to try some new experience is really impactful. I had never done an ice plunge or an ice bath before.
Ooh, okay.
And so we were talking about breath being so powerful, because you don't need to go to an ice plunge to have this experience. Although I highly recommend at least once in your lifetime doing one.
Okay.
I'm going back to do another one for sure.
Oh my gosh.
Have you done one?
I haven't. I want to. Right now, I'm like, I don't think I should, being pregnant, but
probably not.
But
probably not.
Down the line, a few months, I'm like curious, but nervous too, but also curious, and I want to hear all about it.
There's a woman. I know a few people in St. Louis who do it, but specifically, this was the first experience I had, and I would highly recommend them. They were both guests on my podcast.
I think I heard that episode. Yes,
there was one with Aaron. He's the breathwork facilitator.
Okay.
And then there's also Sam or Samantha.
Yes.
And so both of them. And then I think there's a third business partner as well, who I have not had on as a guest.
Okay.
Maybe, we'll see if I do. And it's called 3 Degrees. And so they had it at Yanology, and they're a mobile contrast therapy group that goes around to different locations, which is really cool. But this one was at Yanology. And so we started off inside, and it was a cold day. It was like winter. It wasn't summer, you know, it wasn't freezing cold.
Yeah.
I think it was like maybe in the 40s, 50s. It was a little bit of a warmer cold day, but cold, right? So we started off indoors, and we did about a 15-20 minute breathwork class.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is like we were laying down on the ground, and like high school me would have been like, this is woo woo, this is crazy. Like, I don't have time for this. But now I'm like, as an adult, and I'm more aware of the power and the impact of mindfulness, I'm like, would I be doing this every day? Maybe in theory, but even just taking these moments when I know that there's so much going on and I need a reset, that's how I view this now. So when you lay down on the ground, you close your eyes, and he has music going according to the tempo of the breath work that you do, which is nice. So if you're feeling like self-conscious of how weird you're breathing, because it's almost like certain points you're almost like hyperventilating yourself and your throat's burning. So it's intense breath work. And then you're laying on the ground, your eyes are closed. And apparently, so, you know, the body keeps the score. Your body, even if you quote unquote forget or think you've healed, your body can sometimes retain past traumas or experiences, bad and good. And so when you're closed and your eyes are closed and you're breathing like this, you're going to like, it's almost takes you to this place as if you were like on drugs, if you will. And like, you're very aware of your body, and you could feel certain areas of your body are hot or cold. And apparently the areas where you're hot is where you're holding onto anger, and where you're cold is where you're holding onto sadness, which I thought was really intriguing to just have that moment of like getting in touch with your body and being like, I didn't realize I was sad in my shoulder or angry in my hip. You know what I mean? Like weird stuff. And like whatever you were keeping down, those memories will like pop into your brain. And depending on how intense you go with the breathwork session, this was like very basic level, but there's more intense ones out there. And then we went into the ice plunge for 3 minutes. So that alone, like you're in your bathing suit, you're like, I'm brave. And you go in and you're like, did the thing. And then you realize you have 3 more minutes.
Oh my God. That's a long time.
It's a long time.
I mean, 30 seconds feels like a long time.
Right. So even just getting in, you're like, woo, rush. And then all of a sudden your brain freaks out. It panics because you're like in this cold plunge and you're like, I'm trapped. And then you go into survival mode, and then you're shaking violently from the cold, but really actually it's more the panic.
Wow.
And your body being in a situation that feels hard, but is also you're just thrashing out and panicking. And so they told me the proper like box type breathing to do, and I forgot it completely. And I'm like, I'm panicking. I need help.
What is breathing? I don't know.
Literally, which is actually so realistic to how you feel in life when you're going through something. Like personally throughout high school, and even when I first started working out, my trainer at the gym taught me, he was like, you realize you don't breathe, right? Like when you're focusing, I stop breathing.
Yes.
Because I clench up, and like the breathing would actually help and make life easier, would make moving in the gym easier.
Yeah.
So they both, Sam and Aaron, like crouched down, and they like walk me through it. They're like, you're safe.
Mm-hmm.
Here's this breathing technique, breathe with me. And they told me stories, like just kind of try to
Wow.
distract me. And so the first time was just like, I did the thing and I was like, woo. And then you go to a sauna and you sit there for a few minutes, which was especially cozy after that situation. But then you go back for round 2 to sit in the ice plunge.
You do it twice.
You can even do it 3 times. I did it only
gosh.
twice. But the second time was even more powerful because for me, I had never done it before, but I already kind of knew what I was expecting. And like, it doesn't get easier physically, but I knew to tap into that breath. Like my mind was a little bit more like, okay, strategic. Let's jump into that breathing. You kind of find like a focal point.
Yeah.
And you're like breathing in, holding, and then breathing out for longer.
Yes.
And then in that moment, there's just this, it's wild. You have to just experience it. But like your body creates a thermal layer around yourself once you get your breathing in check. So even though I'm in this ice plunge, all of a sudden I felt warm. All of a sudden I relaxed.
Wow.
And there was a video of me and I couldn't even like stop smiling at a certain point because I'm like, I just calmed my body down.
Oh my gosh.
I am in a hard situation and I snatched my rest through just breathing. And like physically I was in a stressful situation, but you can apply that to anything. Your breath is free, you know, and you can learn all these techniques. But if you need something even more guided, like we live in an age where it's so easy to have access to everything, like between YouTube and ChatGPT and Google, like there's so many options out there of breathing techniques that you can tap into. And even like I recently got into Finch. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar.
Okay. You should check it out.
Okay,
it's so cute. I kind of got
is that the
bird?
Yes, I've heard of that. Yeah, when you like keep it alive by
Well, it's not even, I don't know if it dies without attention. But like we live in this world with like growing up with computer games, but also the dopamine, it helps us. And sometimes helping others is easier for us than helping ourselves. So on this app, it's like a to-do list. And every time you tap your to-do, or you do a reflection journal, or you do a breathing technique, or they have stretching exercises you can do, every time you tap into that, you get points. And those points you can use for new clothes for your little bird. It gives your bird energy. You could send your bird on little vacations. And so like as you're nurturing yourself, you're nurturing this bird. And like it will send you little like messages throughout the day. I'm having a great day. I hope you are too. And if you like every time you enter the app, it asks like where are you mood wise? And if you ever say like sad or angry or anything like that, then there'll be like a first aid kit of like breathing exercises, stretching you can do, naming that emotion. It's been really fun.
That's fun. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, there's so many like techniques out there. And I think what you're saying about the breathing and like the cold plunge is so powerful because I very similarly found like before I really started paying attention to my breath, I would be like holding my breath like while I was working or like doing something very quickly and literally not giving my body the oxygen it needed. And then that sends your body into this fight or flight anxious state, you know, of like panic because it's literally not getting that oxygen. So yeah, so helpful to just be able to breathe and like teach your body to breathe in those stressful situations. I feel like I do things that I've done something that's much more mild in comparison, but like a similar idea, like a gong bath or a sound bath. So like, I've
never done that.
Oh, okay. So it's much more mild, but like similar concept of there's some breath work. And then the teacher that I go to a lot, she says like when the gong gets loud, that like can be triggering for your nervous system. So then just lean into your breath and like pay attention to that there.
I love how she says lean into it.
Yes.
Don't avoid it. Just lean into the uncomfortableness.
Exactly. And like teach your body to breathe through that situation. And so, and then to build on those ideas, I would say too, like that's such an important skill to take care of your body in the midst of everything of life, right? And then also asking the question, what would it be like if we collectively could imagine or create systems that were less stressful in the first place? You know what I mean? So that way it wasn't as maybe normal for us to be in high intensity stress situations chronically.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not avoidable, and nor should we try to avoid it. Like stress isn't bad.
You're going to be challenged.
Yes.
There's going to be hardship in life. It's
Stress,
not always going to be zen.
Yes. Stresses can be healthy for us, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a part of growing.
Yeah.
But like living in a chronic stress state, you know, where that's like every day and I have to like breathe to get through it every day. Like that to me is like, oh, well, there's the red flag. Like, what is it? Not just that I need to change as an individual. No. But like collectively that we can reimagine together. Like we can imagine a new way of doing things. You know what I mean? So I think both of those things work together really well.
Yeah, I agree. I want to try a sound bath.
Yeah. Oh, they're great.
That sounds so cool.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
And so like, I going back to the Babes in Business thing, like I love all the connections that I met through that place because I mean, I want to have all kinds of people on my podcast, not just entrepreneurs. Like I've always said this, like it's a podcast of the people, you know, and I feel like everyone's important. Everyone has a story.
Yes.
And like for me, I feel that there's so much power in owning our stories and sharing them, whether it's just a chit chat conversation or like you have a really powerful story or you're really passionate about a product or business idea that you have. Like, I think there's so many layers to every human being.
Yes.
You know, and I love learning from others. And I think when we hear other people talk about our pain points, in addition to our success stories, it helps us feel less alone.
Absolutely. And,
you know?
And when we can own the uniqueness of our own stories and all of the layers and pay attention to the pain points, not like cut them out or pretend like they don't exist. That changes us. And when we hear the stories from individuals versus like, I don't know, a passed down standard narrative of this is what it means to be in your 20s, or this is what it means to be an entrepreneur or whatever, that's kind of, I don't like something you might read in a textbook or something like that. You know what I mean? Like this disembodied story. Not to say it's totally bad or unhelpful, but it's not the same. Like it doesn't carry the same power as hearing someone's lived experience. And I think to own your own lived experience is what pushes back against systems that aren't helping us collectively. You know what I mean? Because if you can say, oh, this isn't like me with teaching, like this isn't okay. Like this isn't helping me as a person in this profession that's very important and meaningful. And I can own that part of my story, then that gives other people permission to name that within their stories as well. And then if enough people name it, then things can start to change. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like there's a collective awareness about it. I just did a similar workshop, like a writing workshop. Now I do like community-based like writing workshops.
I love that.
Yeah. And this one was specifically around birth and motherhood and like telling your unique story of pregnancy, birth, motherhood, and mothering. Like it doesn't have to be like this biological experience, you know, just that. But like holding space for like those particular stories too, you know? So, I mean, there's so many stories of all of aspects of our lives that if they're not paid attention to, we don't see ourselves fully. And if we don't see ourselves fully, we don't respect our needs fully. And when we don't respect our needs fully, it's really easy to then be caught up in this system that also doesn't respect human needs.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to see that for like, oh, this group of people or this group of people, but we can notice that for all of us, and like claiming one's own suffering doesn't minimize the other suffering that's happening.
No, it doesn't.
It lets us like be honest and then work together and use our creative energy.
Yeah. And I think there's a big difference also in like listening to understand and listening to internalize, right? So it's like, I think sometimes we're so resistant to how other people think or feel or what their values are if they're different than our own, that it's like hard for us as people to hear and not surround ourselves with like-minded individuals, right? And so, but like I said, there's a difference between listening to internalize and listening to understand. Just because someone thinks or feels or lives differently than you doesn't mean just by being around them, that's going to happen to you as well. But if I can understand you more, perhaps you'll teach me something that will change the way I look at it and that will benefit me. Or at the end of a conversation, I might be like, thank you for sharing. I still don't agree.
Yeah.
But like, I understand the world in a much broader sense now, and I appreciate that. And I could see how what you're doing helps others, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just so cool. And I love that you're doing the thing. Like, I have so much respect that you followed that curiosity.
Thank you.
Because, I mean, any listeners who've heard, I'm obsessed with this quote. This is my driving force. This is what helps me when I don't feel the ambition or the drive to do what I do, whether it's my podcast or my coffee. But Zig Ziglar says that if you have an idea for a product or a business and it's not currently a reality, it is your moral obligation to make it a reality.
I love that.
And the moral obligation part is what I keep thinking of, you know, where it's like the same thing with teaching. As a student, I used to be really shy and have a lot of anxiety, but I loved learning. So it's this like weird contrast.
Yeah.
But I was afraid to speak up. And what moved me past that fear was, well, first of all, just, you know, immersive therapy, keep putting myself out there. And then it got easier. But I always had this driving thought of, if I have this question, someone else probably does too.
Yes.
Or they don't even know that they have this question. And like, then they'll be like, hey, that was a really good point. And so it's my responsibility to do that.
Yes.
Right. And so this is why I love hearing about like people's passions, what drives them, what's inspired them. So now you have the tangible product, right? What would you like to do next moving forward? Like, no limitations, no practical stuff, just like, what would be the dream?
Yes. Well, I mean, right now what I'm currently exploring is, in addition to like having this physical product, also hosting workshops for teachers so I do that within school districts and without, specifically around the topics of like real self-care, this embodied wellness framework, and these kind of practices. So that's right now is just like holding those learning spaces. But then beyond that, going back to what you said earlier, like, you mentioned like, I'd love this for not teachers, like for just a general public, like that's definitely in my scope of what I want to create and do that. And think about this more broadly, not just in the system of education, but just for anyone. Yes. Like to practice, noticing that unhelpful patterns that maybe we've been conditioned into, and then giving like life-giving practices that sustain that. And so in the midst of all of that, still like doing my own deconstruction, doing my own learning and continuing to grow and learn more about, possibilities. So that's kind of the scope of what I'm imagining for the future. And then also just wanting to be open to and comfortable with like letting things be birthed as they need to. So, and I'm thinking a lot about just my own creative practice right now and centering that joy, because it's for me very easy to get like wrapped up in like, oh my gosh, like all of this work that I'm doing, but then also remembering like, okay, I don't want to, even though I'm doing a new thing, I don't want to use the same model and system to create this new thing I'm doing. Otherwise it's the same idea, same consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So really in the scope of like, what's coming next, leaning into my own creative practices as well. And then I'd love to hold more spaces that make that accessible, like, I don't know, in a bite-sized way, in the same way I was describing like rest in a bite-sized way.
Yeah.
Like that makes creativity feel like really accessible, because it is this really natural part of ourselves. I think to Dr. Richard Schwartz's work, he's a psychotherapist, and he did all this research and found we all have this core self after like thousands of interviews. And in this core self is like this sense of curiosity, this sense of playfulness, this sense of creativity, connection. And so for me, just how can I tap into that within myself more, and then also hold spaces or workshops or practices for others to do the same. So rather than be scared of their creative power.
Yeah. And as you connect more with the community, people are also really great at like, especially in these types of places where people are wanting to expand and grow. Yeah. I'm sure you'll get a lot of feedback from people about what they would love to see. Yeah. Which will also help like fuel you and help you kind of figure it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, even if you created like an online community, like that would probably be really helpful too. Or even if people
Yes.
can't go to events, or maybe they don't feel comfortable yet going to events,
Yeah.
just kind of seeing other people share inspiration and how they're applying these practices or new practices that could be helpful.
Yes.
That could be really cool too to
I
see.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even in a more like smaller example, my mom's a first grade teacher, and kids, especially that little, it's hard for them to sit for hours.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And not developmentally necessarily appropriate. You
Right.
know, like
And
they need to
nowadays,
move. Yeah.
a lot of kids have ADD,
Mhm.
ADHD, and a lot of parents don't like to medicate their kids that young as well. So my mom's dealing with unmedicated ADD, ADHD. There's all kinds of behavioral issues, right? And so something my mom has implemented a few years ago, probably more than a few years ago, is that randomly throughout the day, not including recess, she'll do these exercises, stretching things where the kids can like run in place, do jumping jacks, do things like that, because they have energy.
Yeah.
But like, it's not appropriate when you're sitting and trying to learn, but like, let's take these mindful breaks throughout the day, because she's understanding them as people, not just this expectation of like what they need.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I love that. And like noticing first, here's the need. Let's try this. And then of course that will grow and grow and grow and evolve over time too. So yeah, that's so inspiring that she's thinking of it in a holistic way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in that too, remembering like we are co-creating these spaces with students. Like, what do we all need together? Even if they're 6 years old or 2 years old, you know what I mean? Like that 2-year-old has as much inherent worth as a 40-year-old with an established business. You know what I mean? So how do we listen to them and then work with them to create learning spaces that work for everyone?
Yeah.
So yeah, that constant interrogation, that constant conversation.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast recently. It was just a little snippet of it. I'm probably going to end up following this podcast now, because like there's been a few that's coming on my For You page, and I'm I'm intrigued. I think I want to listen to the longer format. But this guest that he had on used to be a Secret Service agent. And she was talking about the importance of learning to trust your intuition and gut, and how you develop that.
Interesting.
And part of the issue that a lot of us have now is that we feel this need to contact everyone around us about, what do you think I should do?
Yes.
For small or big decisions. And it's not to take away that like people's opinions are important, but she was saying that it is a good practice to learn not to do that, because in the end of the day, your gut knows. And something that I personally experienced is when I ask other people's opinions, they always have one, right?
Yeah, of course.
But depending on the mood, the day, the way that I am emotionally when I'm explaining the situation is going to affect the advice that they give me, which may or not be the right advice for the full picture of the issue, right?
Yes. And like what you're creating, or where you want to go. Like even if you don't know it in your mind, like your body might know it.
Right.
And be pushing you towards that. Yes. Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I think for anyone out there who like kind of is intrigued by the concept of being an entrepreneur, but they like the golden handcuffs of a 9 to 5. If it's for you, it's fine. Like everyone has what's right for them. But if there's something in you that's like, I'm intrigued, but I don't know where to begin. I didn't know where to begin either. 2 years ago, the whole concept of doing a podcast in a coffee shop was not in the horizon at all. I was focused on climbing the corporate ladder. Yeah. And I think it just starts with being like, well, I could never be an entrepreneur because I don't know what I'm passionate about. Sometimes that comes with questioning yourself constantly, and it's not going to appear to you necessarily overnight. Like I probably would say that there was 5 years of me internally asking this question. Yeah. And then 8 years into my career, seeing that I'm not happy. This doesn't feel like this is where I'm supposed to be for the rest of my life. 8 years is not quite 10 years, but that's almost a lot there. Though. Yeah. It's long enough to know if a career is correct for you or not.
Like you've tried it out. There's been enough ebbs and flows versus 1 year. Yeah.
And so then based on that, the scariness of like that ego death of, okay, I'm not climbing the corporate ladder anymore. So what is success anymore? Because I'm not following a specific path. Yeah. And then building on that, being like, okay, but I don't know what the success path is, but I know that I'm not happy here. How do I figure out that middle ground? It's just taking it step by step. And there's no one right way to be successful at all.
but that constant conversation with yourself, like,
Yeah.
what do I need? Well, and that's one thing I've learned from one of my meditation teachers in a practice of self-compassion. What do I need in this moment? And like constantly letting that question come up versus this is what I should be doing based on these cultural norms or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I really love, just like in your story, how you're embodying like that constant conversation of that. And that, I feel like that's very similar with my experience too. Just, I know I need something else, even though I'm not sure exactly what that is. Like, what does the next right step look like?
And that could take time.
Yes. Well, and if we're building something new, of course it will, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's never been here before. So it does take time and energy and that sense of curiosity. But I mean, for me, I'm constantly going back to this analogy of birth. You know what I mean? Like, you're birthing something new and you don't know what it's going to be like yet. And so just
there's no way to rush the process.
No, you can't rush it. It is what it is. You're not in control of it really, you know? So letting it just come about in the way it needs to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's so powerful because we're coming from different phases of life, right? Like I don't have any kids right now.
Sure.
But you're a mom. And so like my business is my baby at the moment.
Yes.
And so there is this concept of birth, like you're saying, but I have no frame of reference of this. So for me, it's just like totally a new experience. But how cool that you're being a mom, you're able to tap into that experience to help you be an entrepreneur.
Yes. Well, and that goes back to like the workshop I mentioned, like why I felt motivated to do a workshop specifically around like birth and motherhood and mothering. Because those stories are a different paradigm for existing in the world that often are untold. Like we're often told more stories of like conquest and like taking over and like exploration. And I'm not saying those are bad. I'm just saying that's one type of story. Yeah. But how many stories really have we heard in a serious way, in a loud way that address and explore the nuances of what it means to birth something and to mother something?
Yeah.
And I'm saying something like it could be anything, like a business, you know what I mean? Or a human. And so like, just to hear like, oh, that story, even if it's not my experience, that gives me a different type of model for like how I could create something in the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Versus like the way to create something is through burnout and like hyper focus and like perfectionism and all of that. Like that's one story. And then to ask, is that working for us? I think is really helpful and useful because maybe it is, but like also maybe it's not. And we could do it a different way too.
Right.
You know,
there's a guest who I really want to have on the podcast. We'll see if I could convince.
Ooh, manifest that. Yes.
I'm trying so hard to manifest it. Because the thing is like, I really love having these conversations out in the wild in general. What I wanted to do was, I'm like, well, I have this gift to be able to get into these deep conversations with people.
Sure.
But I'm like, I was like, what? How cool would it be to record it and share it with the world?
Yeah.
Because I think it would be impactful.
Yeah.
It's better than a picture, right? So it's just basically like a lookbook memory lane for me of all the cool people that have come into my life.
Yes.
But I'm like, there's this one guy who has ADHD, and he wasn't diagnosed till he was 30.
Oh, wow.
And he's 33 right now.
Okay.
And he and I got into a conversation about it because I also have ADD. And as a child, I didn't really show as much. It is more of like adult onset was really more where it came out. When I was a kid, I think it's because I loved school so much that I hyper focused on it. So I never had an issue in school. But my mom was like, looking back, you always did have all this energy when you came home from school and you never wanted to sit still. And being in that high school, I was overstimulated. But as an adult, all of a sudden, it's like very clear that I have those squirrel moments, and it's obvious.
Sure.
But one of the things that isn't talked about as much with ADD or ADHD is the way that our brains work and our productivity works is that being in that stress zone where my mom used to say I was a procrastinator, but now looking back, I realized it wasn't that I was procrastinating. It's because I have ADD. And so I know about myself that I can like wait till last minute to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the efficiency of this small window,
Mm-hmm.
I get so much done, and I
Mhm.
managed to be valedictorian
Uh-huh.
despite the fact that I would wait last minute to do all these assignments.
Yeah.
Because I knew that I did my best in these small windows.
With like all this pressure.
Yeah. And apparently, and when I was talking to this guy about it, he was like, that is from ADD and ADHD, which I never knew. So I want to talk to him more about that, and how like him going on medication as an adult has totally changed. Because going on medication as a kid, anyone who was diagnosed as a kid, they all hate the medication. They don't want to be on it.
Yeah.
But because he was medicated as an adult,
he chose that for himself.
He chose it for himself. His brain was already developed.
Yeah.
And he never realized what his brain could look like in a more even-keeled way. And now he's like, why would anyone not want to be like this all the time?
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be an interesting conversation.
And he's just very shy. So I'm like, please do this because the world needs it. I'm like, I was so impacted by this knowledge.
Yeah.
So going into depth with it, I think would be so, so impactful.
Yeah. Just like hearing his story and giving him the space and courage and confidence to share it in that way. So yeah, powerful.
That'd be so great.
Yes.
I loved everything about this conversation.
Me too.
This was so meaningful.
Thank you so much.
I have this tradition.
Yes.
At the end of every podcast, I always ask my guests to either share their favorite quote or a little life lesson. And I know, especially since you love to read and you're used to being an English teacher, that you probably have so many.
Yes.
But if you can just give us one.
Sure. One that a quote that's always on my heart. I love Maya Angelou and her work. And she has a quote that says, "We are more alike than we are unalike, my friends." And I always think of that. And I think oftentimes in our pain, it can feel very isolating, or we can create these hierarchies of pain, or so that way we don't really recognize our own. And whether it's in pain or in joy or in creativity, or in like seeing someone achieve their goals, like we were talking about in our conversation, like we are more alike than unalike. If we can imagine it and see people doing it, we can also do it, right?
Yeah.
And we can work in solidarity together. This isn't what I'm talking about. I don't feel like this is something we're going to do on our own, but in our finding our sameness and like our shared humanity, we can really create something new, like really create something new. And so, I love her work, and it's always inspiring to me. And that's a quote that always is on my heart.
That really resonates with me. And it's so funny, whenever I talk to my guests, whatever quote they tell me always reminds me of like another quote that I always love, right? Just like sparks.
Oh my gosh, tell me.
I really wish I remember who said this, but there was this quote that says, "It's hard to hate up close." You know?
Yes.
I think a big part of why we may hate, or sometimes I don't think people really truly hate. I know there's hateful people in the world, but I'm also a very big believer that most people are good. And it's just more ignorance or lack of exposure. So like, for example, if you grew up in an all-white Christian community, Christian schools, and you weren't exposed to other people from other cultures or races, how would you know how to interact with them? To them, they're separate. There's that segregation. And so then you're like, and then there might be the stereotypes. There might be the hateful people who are sprinkling in their opinions. And then you have this preconceived idea about someone. But then once you get to know them, you're like, wait, you're awesome. You know? So like, I really resonated with me about your quote from Maya Angelou, because here in this podcast, another part of what I wanted to do besides just sharing stories was, especially in the climate of the world right now, there aren't many spaces where we can have calm, curious conversations in a respectful way, where it's like, I just want to get to know about you. You know? And like, sometimes it's people who are like-minded, and sometimes people who are totally different than me. But I wanted this to be a safe space where anybody can come on and talk about anything, and we're just learning about each other. And isn't that interesting? And like, wouldn't that be so cool to create a space and a community? You're actually the first podcast that I'm talking about this, but I'm manifesting it. One of the girls who I met from Babes in Business, I should say women. We're not girls. is her name is Angela. She's actually the week before this episode's going to air.
Okay.
Hers is coming out. It's not live yet, or will be when this comes out.
Oh.
But she does these mocktails and mindfulness events,
Yes.
which I'm sure you've seen
Uh-huh.
online.
So cool.
It's unbelievable. And she did it at this garage space. It's called the Garage downtown.
Okay.
And I had this vision where I was like, what if for my 100th episode, I did a live episode.
Oh, cool.
And I invited all the guests who've ever been on.
Yes.
And plus, you know, maybe anyone else who wants to come as well.
Sure.
For two reasons. One, there's so many interesting people. It'd be so cool to like connect that community.
Oh, cool.
And then also like-minded people listen to like-minded podcasts. And since majority of my guests are all local here to St. Louis, to do a local event.
I love that.
Where everyone can get to know each other, and then doing a live podcast where it's like moment of gratitude, thanking everyone for being there, doing any like Q&As. And then I just think that would be really.
I love that. And I mean, talk about building community. I feel like that is a way to build community through storytelling, through connection, through honoring someone else's lived experience, through curiosity. Like that. I love that idea. And I think that would be just such a powerful event.
Because people wouldn't just be meeting me. If they're listening to my podcast and they've listened to all 100 episodes or 99 at that point, or even if they've just, you know, gone through and looked at the little snippets that I have on socials, they're like, it's like meeting your celebrity crush. You know, kind of
absolutely. Well, and even if they don't necessarily follow the podcast, I could see how that type of event would be really appealing to just like hear these stories. Like we're holding a live space to like honor these stories and connect by through curiosity. You know, I love that.
Yeah, but I'm saving it for my 100th episode.
Yeah.
A big part of that was like when I was looking to become a creator, and I didn't just jump into podcasting. I did a lot of research.
Sure.
And Mr. Beast is a very successful YouTuber.
Okay.
And so he had this piece of advice for creators. He's like, if you want to become a creator, you got to create, first of all.
Yes.
Get to 100 episodes, 100 videos. And when you do that, then maybe you're a creator.
Yeah.
You're going to learn so much about the technology, about yourself, about speaking. You're going to think that your stuff is great. You're going to look back. It's all going to suck.
Yes.
And that's okay. Yes. And I think that's the thing where like doing videos like this, it's okay to suck.
Yeah.
You know, like you mentioned earlier before we went live that you were a little nervous.
Yes.
I still get a little nervous before each episode, but it's better than it used to be. First 11 episodes, I sweated through my clothes. I couldn't feel my tongue. I got like a paper tongue at the end. And then it was just like so much.
Yes.
But it gets better. It gets
It's like
easier.
the ice bath.
It is like the ice bath.
You just have to do it. And exactly. And I think, well, going back to, we brought up perfectionism earlier, like if we are so entrenched in perfectionism, we are never going to embrace that awkward beginning and like the weirdness of trying something new out because we're paralyzed with fear. Yeah. And that's, I think, the question. Are we listening to that voice of fear? And if we are, then, you know, I'm not saying that with like to induce shame of like, oh my gosh, you're listening to fear. That's bad. But like, no, that's conditioned oftentimes and can be a way that we're trying to protect ourselves. But are we listening to fear and is it working for us? Like truly, if you're honest with yourself, is it working? Or could you listen to this voice of love, which offers trust, honesty, possibility, growth, regeneration? You know what I mean? And I think really a creative practice or being willing to get in the messiness of creating anything is a practice of love, right? Because you are trusting, you are exploring, you're hopeful. You're communicating something that's true for you, you know? So which voice are you going to listen to and embody really? Yeah.
And the truth is even if you stay in your comfort zone, you're still going to be scared. Yeah. But you're giving that power over to maybe someone else versus taking ownership for your own destiny. Yes. You're never completely in control ever. No. But there's something so powerful about taking a chance on yourself. Yeah, I agree. You'll never regret that. That fear is still going to be there. Even if you're not scared doing the thing, it's still going to be there. It's just going to come out in other ways in your life. Right. Yeah. But you won't regret. Yes. That's the one thing you won't. I always think about this where This is a quote where it's like, if you go to a graveyard, that's where there are the most dreams
Oh, wow.
that like never came
Haunting.
to reality.
Yes.
Right. And so for me, I was always like, I had this dream of a coffee shop. It was a Pinterest board that I had from the time I was like 22, 23,
Yes.
you know, it was like, oh, if I'm very rich and I could just do whatever I want, I'll open a
Yeah.
coffee shop because it's that easy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Without understanding business or the nuances or all the details that go into that.
Mhm.
And a podcast too. Once I got inspired to do that, it was just more of like, I have to at least try.
Yes.
Success is not guaranteed.
True.
It being received well is not guaranteed.
True.
But like just going after something that means something to you,
Yes.
you'll never regret it.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
like you're doing it and you're doing it for yourself. Like you're not waiting on this, like, you know, whatever else to happen or
to have someone hand you the opportunity and be
Yes.
like, oh, I've always wanted you to lead a workshop and change the system for education.
Exactly.
We've been waiting for you.
Yes.
I mean, they have been, but they didn't know that they were waiting for you. Like
Yes.
there's all these teachers and students and like education programs that have been waiting for you,
Yeah.
but they didn't know that they were waiting
Yes.
for you.
And so like, yeah, that's what feels like the new scary part of like, okay, like how do I share this and like, you know, explain why this is valuable or necessary or
Yeah.
beneficial, you know? And so, yeah, exactly. That's the work of it and the figuring out of it for sure.
And your people will find you.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, another thing that I thought was really empowering the other day, this was from an influencer.
Mhm.
She was saying, nobody takes you seriously until it's cool to take you seriously.
Mm.
In other words, like in the beginning, putting yourself out there, acting like the professional, acting like you have some sort of confidence and direction, which you need to do.
Right.
People maybe won't jump on board right away. Sometimes
Sure.
they do, sometimes they don't. Your people will always find you
Yeah.
in the beginning, but like it maybe won't take on as much of an impact as you want it to right away.
Oh, of course.
You're making impact, but it's like, you know, that if people would just jump on board,
Yes.
you see the vision.
Yes.
And it's hard when others aren't quite there yet.
Yeah.
Right? Like they might be dipping their toes in or they may not be dipping in at all.
Yeah.
And like that could be disheartening. But at the same time, all it takes is that one moment.
Yes.
And that one moment comes from a lot of failed moments.
Right.
And a lot of course correcting.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. I know. And that's what I like remind myself in this journey is just like in the right time. You know,
the right time.
Like not forcing it.
And
but
the
like,
blessing of slow beginnings.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Because you can work the kinks out right now.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. This is so great.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Just to leave off, is there anything else that like we can do to support you on your journey?
I mean, I think if these ideas resonate with you, like exploring this plan book, sharing it with your teacher friends, you know, looking into these workshops or hosting space like it, or just start or continuing that conversation with me about it. Like if this is something that viewers resonates with them in their educational journey, even if they're not a teacher or teachers themselves. Just getting in touch with me and starting that conversation and seeing what we can build together too. So
This was great.
Mm-hmm.
This was so powerful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing about all the ins and outs of like what you do and how you're doing it.
Thank you.
I've learned a lot.
Absolutely my pleasure. So glad to talk with you today and just appreciate you holding this space and creating these conversations. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you guys are not already watching this, we have the video on YouTube or Spotify. And if you're not already following, what are you doing with your life? Go follow on whatever podcast platform you prefer. But I am trying to specifically grow my YouTube platform. So if you can give that a subscribe, that would be amazing, and a thumbs up. And then, of course, just share with a friend. I hope you guys have a great week. Let's get it. Let's go.